on, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
When Hasbro fucks up, it creates a vacuum that third-party companies are very happy to fill. Of course, eventually Hasbro will go back and fix those gaps at some point, but in the meantime, if you're impatient, you will have options. DNA Design is typically great on this. If there's something that Hasbro has missed on a certain figure, then DNA will come back and fix those things with an upgrade kit. But one thing they've always been a bit iffy on is the included figures. With SS86 Grimlock and Slug, there was a desire for the Exosuit and Wheelie. One of them's okay, but one of them... hot damn, I can see why DNA stopped doing these. Of course, one thing to keep in mind with these two figures, they are essentially pack-ins with existing upgrade kits. The big draw of these sets is the parts for the Studio Series 86 Dinobots. These sort of figures that I'm covering here are secondary, pretty much. And that is basically what I bought them for. I wanted the clear neck on Grimlock more than anything, and the arms and everything else was just a bonus. And I did want the red horns for Slug over here, so, you know, I got what I wanted. I'm not calling him by his G1 name because that's a slur, and I'm not calling him Slug because that sounds stupid, so we're sticking with Slug. Deal with it. But the point is, these aren't really the main event. They are the pack-ins. It's sort of the opposite of the Make Toys set for Battle in Space Cyclonus, where the tailgate was the main focus of that set. These are not the main focus, and it really shows. Starting off with Wheelie, this is just awful. It looks awful, it holds together awful, it's built awfully. From every single angle, it's just not an acceptable Legends figure. For starters, the plastic feels very cheap. I know DNA Design doesn't use the best plastic, but especially with this almost feels like KO plastic. It's just not built very well. Paint's also not very good too. The pink that they've chosen is that really icky, chalky kind that a lot of companies keep using. I've never liked this, and it's just as bad here. The application is okay, it's in all the right spots, it makes it look fine, but it's just not great. And they also miss a lot of things, like at the back here, the backpack just has nothing. And the window is just a great big grey slab of nothing. Like, couldn't you put any blue paint on there? The Studio Series version put blue paint on there. It seems a bit iffy. Design-wise, it's just a nothing. I'm not exactly expecting it to be as good as the Titan Return version was. That was sort of lightning in a bottle. But here, it's basically a thing on top of the legs and the arms are just sticking out the sides. There's really no cohesion at all. It's a bunch of random shapes that do nothing. And there's this big gap at the front here where the feet are, not helped by the orange being very sloppily applied. I get that orange is very hard to do. I mean, it's literally a mixture of yellow and red, two of the hardest colors to paint. But this really needed another few coats. This is just not acceptable. The wheels are painted nice, but they are completely fake. They don't roll at all, which on a figure that came out fairly recently, I don't think that's acceptable. On something as small as, say, New Age Bumblebee, sure, I can let that slide. I mean, it's tiny. But even on their 2.0 version, they managed to get the wheels to work. On something this big, not acceptable. And the worst part, nothing stays tabbed together. You may have noticed I've been wobbling everything around, and that's because the arms don't tab in. They have tabs here that are supposed to slot in there. The problem is they don't sit quite so flush, and because it's on an angle and a whole bunch of other things and the tolerances aren't right, they just don't work. This thing doesn't hold together, and that's ignoring the fact that the top of it doesn't actually tab in there. It just sits loosely, and any thing just can bump it off. The only thing that really stays tabbed together are the legs with themselves. That's not acceptable. This whole alt mode isn't acceptable in any way. There's a reason it ended up on the worst of 2022 list. It's just a fucking atrocity. But the question remains, is it worse than the Studio Series 86? I can't even keep a straight face. There's no contest. This is just awful. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of the SS86 Wheelie mold. I think the Times of Turn version is better. But look at this shit. This is just so bad. I get that it's one of the first Legend scale figures DNA Design has made, but there was so much stuff they could have taken inspiration from. They could have looked at any one of the third-party Legends companies and said, oh, I guess we just do that. But no, they just rushed this to production, and it is just bad. I guess size-wise, he's 4.9 centimeters wide, 6.7 centimeters long, and 2.8 centimeters tall, so he's in the right size, I suppose, but why would you get this? It's just bad. Now, Spikle, on the other hand, I don't know if it's Spike or Daniel, so I'll just call him Spikle. Interesting. Technically, the alt mode is actually better than the core class version. It's a lot more compact. It actually does things. This is a bunch of limbs just kind of put in a random assortment. This actually transforms. There's benefits to wanting this one in vehicle mode over the other one. Sure, you do have to deal with the fake wheels again, that is unfortunate, but it's more compact. The legs actually transform. In fact, this does actually have an interesting transformation. Granted, the transformation does have some iffy hardware, but this actually works. Really, my major gripe in this mode is that the hip section is completely visible. I mean, the hands are visible too, but that's kind of emblematic of the screen model. With this, you know, it's something I would have had a panel to fold over, but still, this is alright. I would even say better than the Studio Series version. This thing kind of barely transforms. This actually transforms. And there are issues in the robot mode, sure, but honestly, I think this is alright. I mean, it's certainly a step above this shit. You can see that they've taken what they've learned with Wheelie and put it into Spikle. They've improved a lot with this figure, and I do commend them for that. For all the jabs I take at Wheelie, they haven't sat on their laurels. They've put in the hard yards. They've actually improved. And that is commendable, even if we're stuck with some pretty shitty growing pains. Anywho, 4 dimensions, he is 4 centimeters wide, 7.3 centimeters long, and 2.5 centimeters tall. And for comparisons, here they are next to a standard Legion figure, a standard core class figure, so they're considerably smaller, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not-so-standard LEGO minifigure, and crumbs. Predictably, the transformation with Wheelie is complete and utter dog shit. Technically, the steps aren't bad in themselves, but with all the tolerances, they just do not work. First step is technically untab it from the legs here, but really it's just sitting there loosely. The hinge moves all the way up, and so do the legs. Fold in the feet at the bottom and separate. Bring the arms down, and they're really weirdly tolerant, so they feel really tight. Open up this flap at the top, come all the way down. Bring this panel in at the bottom. This folds down, but careful not to disassemble the whole thing because these pins are really loose, and I've had them fall apart sometimes before, and you fold in the torso, and you move around the head, and the fists come out like so, and you're done. Spikle is interesting because he's got a lot of really good transformation steps, but the hardware kind of betrays it. This could be a top tier Legends figure, but it just fails in a few places. First thing you want to do is untab the arms from the side, and this is what I mean. It's got this swiveling section in the middle that has to swivel over to there because they didn't have 2 cuts for the ball joints due to stability, so you kind of have to wiggle it in a certain way. It doesn't really work, and it sometimes falls off like that. But really what you want to do is get this like that. Getting it to transform is very annoying. Sometimes it's a little easier, but this isn't one of those times. Because it wants to stay in place, but it just refuses to. It's a lot easier going the other way. Just come on. Maybe just forget my fingernail in there. There we go. Not the best terms of hardware, and also that brings me to the next thing. This just falls off. It's supposed to swivel, but it's not actually pinned in, so it just comes off like that, showing his cold, dead face. I guess that is Daniel. He looks a lot more like Daniel than Spike. The waist rotates around 180 degrees. The legs come up on double hinges. That sort of Iron Factory style of leg transformation. Never really been a fan of that personally. The feet rotate down like so, and if you haven't already, the heel spurs do as well. And you're basically done. Like, the transformation itself is a really cool transformation, but the hardware, the joints you use to get there, not ideal. In robot mode, it's pretty much the same thing again. You've got complete and utter dog shit, and then you've got an improvement in every single way. Everything they learned from this, they put into this, and it really makes sense. I'm not going to say Wheelie is worse in his vehicle mode. He is reasonably better. There's a lot of things that work a lot better. For instance, the orange paint is far nicer. The proportions are fine. On a base level, the design isn't hateful, everything below here anyway. It's got a lot of paint, and it works reasonably well. Even the chalky paint becomes a lot less of an issue now that there's less of it on show, I guess because it's broken up by the grey. It is a better mode, but that head sculpt, ugh. Legitimately, the Action Master had a better face sculpt than this thing did. Legitimately, the Studio Series 86 was essentially an Action Master, had a way better head sculpt than this did. This is classic third-party style head sculpt where they just miss the money entirely. And really, that makes the rest of the robot look really bad. Head sculpts can ruin designs, and this is one of the cases where it does that. Sure, if head sculpt's not ideal, I can forgive it, but this is worse than not being ideal. This is just really ugly. The way it's squinted, the way the lips are, the way it's proportioned, it's just not good. Now, granted, a lot of that does come down to the fact that Wheelie has a pretty weird head sculpt, all things considered. It's not a head sculpt that lends itself very easily to toyetic design, so if you f it up, it makes it even worse. Honestly, I would say the proportions on this Wheelie are a lot better. It's a lot less dumpy than this. I mean, in general, I think the Times of Turn is better than both of them, but But there could be good here if it wasn't for that head sculpt, and it wasn't for the really ugly chest. I'm sorry, that grey torso is just so bland. Just do it in blue, or in clear, or just something else, like black, come on. Also, you look from the top and he's completely hollow, like, come on, that's not cool. And one thing that I really dislike is the tolerances. He just does not hold together very well. He's got ball jointed shoulders, which are really tight for some reason when you go further back, like that's as far back as it'll go just because it's tight. Ball jointed elbows, which again, they go tight on the bicep swivel. Ball jointed elbows, which get really tight on the bicep swivel, so he can go up and down just fine, but you really got to push to get it to the side. Also, this tab here on the fist is very unsightly. This whole thing should have been engineered differently. Ball jointed waist, which works all right, but push it too far down because of the torso, and you know. Ball jointed hips that are really loose over here, but then get really tight up here. Also, they're pretty loose out to the side as well. Absurdly tight thigh swivels that just come off the ball joint. So I'm going to pop that back on and pretend it doesn't exist. The knees are fine. They could be a little bit tighter, but whatever. And then he's got foot motion here, but he can't really stand. There's no ankles, so he falls over very easily. That right there is just the figure in a nutshell. They were basically handed this on a silver platter. They were competing with a Action Master, and this is what we got. It's not acceptable. I'm sorry, it just isn't. Anyway, before this falls over again, he's 4.5 centimeters wide and 8.2 centimeters tall. Fuck! Daniel's a bit more interesting. He does have some good qualities. He's almost there. He's like almost the perfect Daniel, but there's a few shortcomings here and there. Proportions are really good. They're very downward swept, so he's very bulky at the bottom and very thin up the top, and I really like that kind of design for utilitarian robots. Especially because this is a mech suit, I think it works really well. The paint, for the most part, is really good. I love this sort of toothpaste green they use for the legs. I don't think it's accurate, but I think it's a really nice aesthetic choice that they have. And the yellow in the torso is done really well, going from how shit Wheelie was done with the orange to this. It's really good. But then by the same token, the head has basically nothing on it, which... come on, why? I'm not going to pretend the Studio Series was much better with its sort of train figurine style face, you know, those kinds of people you put on model train sets, but it still looked better than this. To be fair, it did come out a lot later than this figure. They didn't really know what they were doing, but still. Overall, I do think this is a better figure in robot mode simply because it's a much more durable figure, but there are things to like about this one. Articulation is pretty good. You can take this off and rotate the head, but I really prefer the tab at the back of the Studio Series version. So it's unfortunate, but they didn't really have that hindsight. You got universal joints here, and you got the ball joints that would function here. That doesn't bend, of course, but because of the way it transforms, I understand. Unfortunately, a lot of hollowness on the side of the arm there. It's something they could definitely improve upon in the future. If it had a future, but unfortunately, they've sort of stopped making these figures. Universal hips that are a bit limited. They go all the way forward, but outwards because of the tabs they don't. And then they got nothing backwards. I do kind of get it because of the transformation, but it could have been done a lot better. You got a thigh swivel, and of course you got the knee. Would have been nice to be double since they've got the two hinges in there, but yeah, it's all right. And he's actually got ankles, which is very nice. The articulation is categorically a little bit better than the Studio Series version, especially with that waist swivel. Actually, yeah, I forgot to mention, he also has a waist swivel. I think I kind of prefer this figure to the Studio Series version, but there are definitely shortcomings with it. It's got jank in a few more areas. In essence, it's a figure that takes more risks, but reaps more rewards. Whereas Studio Series plays it very safe. Like, honestly, this is barely a core class figure. It's more an action master that barely turns into anything, whereas this is more of a transformer. If I could take the head paint from this onto this, I would say this would be my definitive Daniel. Actually, because I think this is Daniel and this is more Spike, you could really just pair the two up together. Nice way of doing things. In fact, I think that's what I'll end up doing. Anyway, to finish off, he's about 4 centimeters wide, although the arms are a bit further out so it doesn't seem like it, and 8 centimeters tall. And for ye old comparisons, here they are next to a standard Legion figure, a standard core class figure, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not so standard Lego minifigure, and crumbs. DNA Design is a fine company. I love their work. I love upgrading my figures. They work really well. But this here is an example of when they just do not work. The exosuit, great. I think it's pretty good. I prefer it to the Hasbro version. But Wheelie, oh my God, how do they f it up? I mean, to an extent, Hasbro didn't do as well as the Titans Return version, but with DNA Wheelie, hot damn, that is just bad. I can sort of see why DNA Design moved away from making small pack-in figures for their releases. Many people keep asking where the minicons are, why none of their sets include minicons, and with figures as bad as that, I can sort of see why that happened. Of course, I don't agree with it. I would have preferred if they'd actually made them better, but I see why they moved away. Who is this for? Especially with the advent of Studio Series 86, I don't see any reason to get this Wheelie. And even though I prefer the exosuit here, it's still, most people will just get the Hasbro one. They just feel like figures that don't need to exist. They're figures that were packed in just because they could have been packed in. And sometimes DNA does that. Sometimes they include things just for the sake of packing them in. This is one such instance of that, and I'm not a fan of it. But at the end of the day, I guess they're harmless. You don't have to upgrade the SS86 Dinobots. They are still pretty good. But if you happen to, it's rather unfortunate you got saddled with these. But if you want to talk about figures, I don't think there's a figure in this marathon that pisses me off more than this one does. Or rather, the 3 figures that piss me off more than these do. Tomorrow, I'm again bending the rules on what constitutes a small-scale figure, but I need to talk about these. I need to get the word out on why these 2 suck so bad. I guess I'll see y'all tomorrow, because we're gonna tackle some shit.